Hey there, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on what part of the country you are in. This is Jack Mannon. I am from the Builders FirstSource marketing team. And yeah, my pleasure to welcome you today to our second Market Intelligence webinar of the year. It seems like just yesterday we had our April webinar, but at the same time, it feels like that was a long time ago. Lots has happened since then. So excited to catch you up and share insights and opinions and get the conversation going. A quick note from legal here up on the screen about our forward-looking statements. Joining Allie Wolf today will be Tim Page, our Executive Vice President of Digital Solutions, along with members of our leaders from our supply chain and millwork team. And also a reminder that we are going to do a formal Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to chat those in using the chat feature on the right side of your screen. So without further ado, allow me to introduce Tim Page, our Executive Vice President of Digital Tools. Tim?
All right, very good. And thank you, Jack. And thank you to all of you who are joining us today. I'll start our webinar with a quick update on our digital solutions. The goal of our digital initiative is to make it easier for home builders to do business with our company while also providing tools that help you gain efficiencies. We introduced our mybldr.com platform earlier this year at the International Builders Show. It's our collaborative project management tool for home builders, which connects front-end design and sales with material quoting and procurement, and then with the construction of the home. Capabilities include document storage, plan markup, material quoting and procurement, delivery tracking, construction scheduling, budgeting, and much, much more. We're seeing an increase in use of mybldr.com across our BFS customer base. If you haven't already done so, I encourage you to take a look at mybldr.com. You can talk to your BFS sales representative or local digital sales specialist to learn more. The next slide highlights the configure module within mybldr.com. It is our integrated homebuyer selection tool. Configure provides photorealistic exterior and interior 3D visualizations with the ability to easily compare different designs. Within Configure, home builders are able to select the products they want to offer their home buyer from our national catalog, which is currently being rolled out and includes thousands of manufacturer products, styles, and colors. If you're not ready to move your business over to 3D, that's okay. You can now also leverage Configure with our new 2D selection book, which is a free tool that you can use in working with your home buyer to capture the 100+ selections that are needed in your projects. You'll find the new selection process takes just minutes. It's very easy to use and very easy to share with your home buyer. And in just a couple months, we'll be adding a new feature which will allow home builders to easily add their own product content to the tool, which means you can include selections that may not yet be available in our catalog. Finally, I'd like to make you aware of our 24-episode series that we're doing with Matt Reisinger and the Build Show. Matt is a recognized expert in building science and high-performance construction. He's leveraging our ReadyFrame product as well as our digital tools in completing this project, which is also available for you to use, as that plan is right in our BFS home plan library. The series gives you the opportunity to learn more about our innovative products from our supply partners that are available through Builders FirstSource, as well as the proper installation of those products. So please check it out on our website, www.bldr.com. Under the tab Experts, you'll have access to all the episodes that have been completed so far, including this latest episode, which is about rooftop installation. So thank you again for joining today's webinar. With that, I'll turn it over to Brett Dewey, our Vice President of Millwork.
Thanks, Tim. Exciting stuff going on your end. There's likewise a lot going on the ocean freight side. Most products being imported from Southeast Asia have seen an increase between $6,000 to $8,000 per container. This will equate between a 5 to 15% price increase, depending upon the value of the material on the container. We believe these increases are not sustainable and will soften with the peak holiday shipment slowing. Unfortunately, South America has also seen increases of approximately $3,000 per container. That equates to a 5 to 10% increase in landed material cost that'll be landing in August and September. What's driving this other than the peak holiday season? The Suez Canal lanes have been diverted to go around Africa. That's adding like another 20 days to the sailings. And worldwide, that alone takes 6% of the total worldwide shipping capacity offline, in essence. So it is impactful. Steamships lines are also canceling sailings that further impact the capacity. If that's not enough to further complicate things, if you're on the East Coast or the Gulf Coast, be careful. The International Longshoremen's contract expires on October 1st of this year. They have vowed a work stoppage at those ports if a new contract is not in place. So be wary of that date of October 1st if they do not come to a new contract. The ILA president has said that there is zero chance of renewing their current contract. So there will be some stiff negotiations going on there. As a result of these above issues, inventory levels, particularly of millwork items, are extremely low. The lead times have gone from 13 to 14 weeks out to 20 to 24 weeks. That's driven either by selling constraints, record floods in Brazil that shut down the largest port in southern Brazil, port strikes in Chile that have been resolved, but created a huge backlog of containers not shipping. So, and what we stated about Southeast Asia already, it's driven low inventory levels in the U.S. of many products. With that, I conclude my comments. We'll turn it over to Jeff Rettig, our VP of Building Products.
Thanks, Brett. In discussions with builders, we're asked often about which products we're seeing or having issues with availability so they can plan accordingly. And then we're asked also about where prices are going. Around availability, we're still seeing roofing and insulation segments tight as there's been little additional capacity brought on over the past few years. A bright spot would be Knauf Insulation. They have a plant opening in Texas in the latter half of this year that should ease up fiberglass insulation availability going into 2025. And as Brett mentioned just a second ago, we're seeing longer lead times due to overseas shipping issues that could impact availability on roofing, underlayment, fasteners, and as moldings, as Brett suggested. Around pricing, we continue to see prices increase in low single digits across multiple categories to account for rising labor costs, increasing freight, and core product costs. We expect to see this continue into 2025 as the economy continues to deal with inflation. Now, a few notes from lumber, or from Matt Lufkin, our VP of Forest Products. In lumber, forest fires are in the news again, and there's always a watch out at this time of the year. So far, nothing has been large enough to affect overall production, though. Unfortunately, forest fires are not new to the industry and happen every year. The limited impact we're seeing at this point are some rail cars are being rerouted around the areas of forest fires, and this is extending some delivery times. One possible point of concern would be some fires are burning in active harvest areas, and this could affect the log deck productions in Q4. In regard to pricing, any positive economic news heading into the back half of this year could cause a pull forward of purchasing for Q1 demand, but that's not likely until very late into Q4. Around OSB, we're currently seeing some manufacturers adjusting their production scheduling to align with the slower pace of demand across the markets. A few manufacturers have invested in new capacity that should be coming online over the next few months. Unless there's a significant increase of demand to consume the current production, mixed with the new capacity coming online in late Q4, the markets will probably remain in the range bound for balance of the year. And now, with that, I'll turn it over to Allie Wolf, Chief Economist for Zonda. Take it away, Allie.
Thank you, Jeff, and hello, everyone. I am delighted to be back to go through the state of the housing market and wider economy. As mentioned, I am Allie Wolf, the Chief Economist with Zonda. If you're not overly familiar with Zonda, we are a housing data and consultancy firm. We track the entire building life cycle from raw land up until the closing out of new home communities. Now, my role at Zonda is to run our economics department, where every month we put out a report called our National Outlook. The National Outlook looks at anything and everything related to the economy, demographics, and the housing market. We'll go through a little bit of all of that here today. In my 40-minute presentation, we have 5 sections to get through. We will start with the economic backdrop, then talk about housing trends, notably talking about what we're seeing in the resale market and what we're seeing with current new home sales. We'll look at housing supply, a little bit on the rental market and the remodeling space, and then I'll finish with our forecasts and final thoughts. Now, where I want to start is by acknowledging the mixed messages that we're seeing in the wider economy today. I'm sure many of you saw, we got a very good GDP report. That's the broadest measure of the economy. And if you looked at the details of the GDP report, you could see that the economy still is being fueled by consumers. But if you look at consumers, you can't describe all in one statement, because there are some consumers today that, yes, they're still spending, but the way they're able to spend today is by working through their savings accounts and taking on higher debt levels. In fact, we do know that there are some credit card delinquencies that are rising, and same with auto loan delinquencies, in some cases back to the highest level since 2010. Now, we know for this certain subset of consumers, it's usually lower and medium income households, and they're struggling with what has happened with prices. They're struggling with the extent to which we've seen inflation just over the past 4 years alone. So there is this group of consumers that are kind of causing these question marks in the economy. And then we have a whole different subset of consumers that do not have to work through their savings account to spend, that have seen not only their incomes grow over the past few years, but they've also seen the value of their assets go up. We've seen lots of wealth accumulation, in part because of the stock market and also because of home prices. Now, good news is that if you track out inflation, the overall price levels are not coming down, but the rate at which prices are going up is at least slowing from where it was at the height of the market, moving in the direction that the Federal Reserve would like to see. In addition, if you look at the labor market, we have seen the unemployment rate rise up, a 3.4 low to where we are today at 4.1%. But you have to listen to the comments from our chairman, Jerome Powell. At the Federal Reserve, he basically is saying that they feel much more confident about the economy today. They no longer feel that it is overheating. They feel that it is moving into a more balanced and healthy place. Now, if you look at risks, we shouldn't downplay some of the geopolitical tensions that we're seeing play out, the very low mobility levels that we've seen. Last year, as a reminder, was the lowest year for mobility on record. And of course, the fact that it's an election year. And I'll mention this a couple times in the presentation, but we've definitely seen consumers start to pull back, move to the sidelines as we get closer and closer to the election. But if you roll it all together, at least where we sit today, there has been this remarkable resilience in the US economy. But you have to think about those goods and the bads, kind of the push and pull in the market. And the Federal Reserve is trying to take it all in. They're trying to say, have we ultimately achieved that dual mandate? Do we feel good about the labor front? Do we feel good about inflation? They have felt good, I would say, from the employment point of view, that the market is slowing but growing for the past handful of months. For inflation, they've still been uncertain about it. But at this point now, we have had 3 months in a row where the data does tell us that inflation is at least not picking back up steam, which is important for the Federal Reserve to think about. So the calendar here is going to tell you what are the possible outcomes of when we could see the Federal Reserve begin to cut rates. The Fed has a meeting next week. That would be the July reading. And we don't think, they could surprise us, but we don't think we will see a cut then. I don't think the Fed has communicated it enough. And generally, they like to not spook markets. If they do not cut in July, they are not cutting in August simply because they're not meeting. So from my point of view, the first plausible time that we could see a cut would be September. Again, if the Federal Reserve does not cut in September, they're not cutting in October because they're not meeting. That brings us to November. Now, if you think about the Federal Reserve, I want you to remember that the chairman gets elected on off cycles of the election. The Federal Reserve is supposed to be apolitical. And so I think, but I don't know for sure, that the Federal Reserve may just take November off to not be seen as making any kind of political stance. But their meeting is November 6th and 7th. Then you have December. From my account, I think September or December are two likely options that we either see 1 or 2 rate cuts this year. Our base cut is that we at least see one at one of those 2 different timeframes. So we do think the Fed does start to cut, but remember that while we do like to focus on what the Federal Reserve is doing, it's the bond market that is actually playing into the housing market on a day-to-day, minute-by-minute basis. And there has been volatility in rates, but if you think about this year, we've been pretty consistent with interest rates between the high 6s and low 7s. And that's where we're holding today. And I want to bring that discussion of higher interest rates and where might they go to what we're seeing in the housing market. The higher interest rates combined with the higher home prices are obviously leading to, I think, the core problem in the housing market today, which is affordability. You have the election that's causing a little bit of consumer uncertainty, and you have people that just feel discontented. They don't feel happy with the options that are available, and this ties back to what I had said earlier, consumers sitting on the sidelines. Right now, we have 80% of consumers surveyed by Fannie Mae that say now is a bad time to buy. Going into the pandemic, that ranged between 30 and 40% from 2010 all the way up until 2020. So we are just off this record level of consumers feeling a little bit uncertain about the market. And it's not just sentiment. We got the new data this week that backed that up, with existing home sales coming down, still down 28% from 2019. So we know that from the existing home side, we're still in this kind of crippled environment. But there is some good news if you look at listings. Now, active listings have been so low for so long, and we know that that's part of the reason we've seen home price appreciation. When we look at active listings so far this year, that's going to be the green line that's not fully formed. We know that inventory right now is up 37% compared to last year. We are now basically in line with where we were in June of 2020. So to me, this signals more health. Seeing more listings is a good move in the right direction. But remember what I'll always say, context is important. Yes, there has been a lift in inventory, but where this leaves us relative to 2019, a market that we would deem more normal, still down 31%. But a key theme in today's presentation is going to be, these national stats are great. They can kind of give you a high level view, but what is happening in the housing market is so specific today. So I'm going to show you then the listings data year over year and change from 2019 across top markets. This map is showing you year over year. As a reminder, nationally, we're up 37%. So any of the dots that are a darker purple are markets that have had an outsized increase. You can see in some cases, look at Tampa, Florida, a 90% increase in active listings compared to last year. Lots of concentration in parts of Florida, the Southeast, Colorado, Arizona, and parts of California, Texas as well. When you look at this, to me, the year-over-year change flags markets. This is the chart that I look at to say, where should I be looking across the country? Where have there been big changes? But again, we want to focus on that context as well. Okay, yes, we're seeing a shift. We're seeing an increase year over year. How does this look relative to 2019? Now what you'll find is we only have 3 states where we have some markets where overall inventory is above 2019. That's parts of Florida, that's parts of Texas, and you see parts of Colorado. In most other areas, you are still seeing that consistent theme where inventory is down double digits, 20, 30, 40% compared to pre-pandemic. But what should be odd is those markets that do have inventory up from 2019. Because so much of the housing discussion is that no one's ever going to sell, no one's ever going to move because they've locked in a low rate. But we are seeing in some cases people are selling and people are moving. And why is that the case? We think in some areas this comes down to, yes, someone may have a low interest rate, but maybe they're getting their insurance cost bill that has gone up a lot with higher property tax bills, and they're evaluating their current living situation. You may just have some opportunistic sellers, maybe some investors that are looking to offload homes. But I also think what's important is if you look at Texas and Florida, these are our top 2 production markets across the country. Consumers often say that they're not moving because they don't see other options. But if builders have been building new homes and those look a little bit more appealing, that could also help make people feel less stuck and allow for a little bit more mobility. The reason, though, we care about the resale market is because of that interconnectivity between resale activity and new home activity. So every month this year, we've been asking builders about how that resale competition is playing into their business. These are the results as of Monday of this week. We have 56% of builders that said they have very little competition from the resale side, 27% that are saying a little, and you only have 14% that are saying there's a moderate level. If you break it out by state, I don't think anyone will be surprised that Texas and Florida are the 2 states where we do see the highest share of builders saying that competition from the resale market is playing into their business at least a little bit. But for most builders and most markets, they're not that concerned about the resale environment, and you can understand why. If you look at new home sales, again, this is tracking it out by month, by year, what you can find is for 2024, June has followed this traditional seasonal path. The market is not as hot as it was at the beginning of the year, but not abnormally slow like we saw in 2022, not having no seasonality at all like we saw in 2020 when the market just kept going and kept going. We're seeing the market look a little bit more normal. You'll see another chart a little bit later that backs up that idea of normal in the market. But what we like to do is take the overall sales number and then say, okay, how does this look across the country? We're able to look at this data through our Zonda database by creating what is known as the Zonda market ranking. I will call this the ZMR. The ZMR looks at sales across the country. It adjusts sales for supply. It adjusts sales for seasonality, and it looks at each market relative to itself over time. That's how we're able to come up with these different figures. Nationally, where we came in June is slightly overperforming. Any of the green dots on the map will be overperforming as well. Now, if we have some builders on the call, I want to make it very clear. The ZMR can often overstate what the market feels like from a builder point of view, especially in a market like today. Because as I talk to a lot of builders, they will say, oh, the market feels hard. We're having to spend a lot of marketing dollars. We're having to use a lot of incentives to secure a sale. The ZMR doesn't care how hard it is to secure a sale. We're just counting that actual sales number, which is why we get to that slightly overperforming. Has nothing to do with my opinion, is just based on data. Now, there was an interesting thing. We've had this ZMR developed for over a year now, and when I've done presentations, I've talked about how it's very hard, though, to make a blanket statement, even if you look at a market like Las Vegas, because it is going to depend on what price point or what area within Las Vegas. So this is actually the first time I'm ever showing this data publicly for all 3 of the tiers. We have now created the ZMR for 3 different price tiers. So we can look at entry level, we can look at move up, and we can look at high end to see how that varies by location. So entry level, and this has matched what we've heard from our clients, but also what we've been saying consistently, is still the slowest of the 3 categories. Entry level is coming in nationally as slightly overperforming, but it goes back to what I said on the last slide. When I talk to builders in the entry level space, they will be the ones that will say, we have consumers that are struggling with their debt levels. We have consumers that have high debt to income ratios that we're more concerned about their finances. And for us to convert a sale, in a lot of cases for entry level, it costs a lot of money. A more aggressive buy down may be needed, or funds towards closing costs may be needed. If you look at the distribution on the left, you can see compared to the national figure on the entry level side, there's more markets that fall into that average camp. You still have only 20% of the markets across the country that fall in underperforming, which would be the red dot. If you move on to the move up / move down market, think of this as the middle third. An important thing that you should know is we know that the move up market in LA would be different than the move up market in Orlando, Florida. So each of the calculations we do is relative to the market itself. We're not trying to apply a blanket figure. We're looking at each market in isolation. Now, the move up, move down market is actually the strongest today. You can see 75% of the top markets we're looking at here are overperforming. This category as a whole actually comes in as significantly overperforming. Again, if you read some articles about the lock-in effect, this may seem like an odd thing. Why is the move up market actually doing well? Well, remember, part of it is move down, which will include the baby boomer population, many of which are retiring, many of which are moving and looking for maybe that different price tier. But I'd say almost more importantly, if you think about someone who has locked in a 3 or 4% interest rate, and maybe they want to move, but they feel like the math makes it too hard for them to be able to. If someone, let's say, has locked in 4% on their existing home and they go to certain buyers and they use a mortgage rate buy down, maybe they're only resetting their interest rate from 4% to maybe 5 or 5.5%. Versus if they went in the resale market and resetting at 6.8, 6.9, 7%. I think that what we have found is there has been this outperformance in the move up market for the new home side of the world. Then we'll finish the discussion here by looking at the high-end market that comes in as slightly overperforming. What's interesting to me is that there's actually a lot of very saturated green dots, which signify significant overperformance in select markets. This ties back to what I had said earlier. There are select consumers that are struggling. We're seeing that play into the entry level. There are select consumers that have seen their wealth go up so much over the past few years. That's allowing for some of the strength in the high-end market. Now, each of those slides up until this point brought us through the end of June. But like I said, we collect data from our builder survey mid-month. We have results through Monday on how July has been so far. Now, I want to step back. When we talk to builders, one of the questions we like to ask is how the market feels. At Zonda, we can track the actual sales numbers. We like to get that sentiment on the ground. April, the market felt good. May, the market felt slower. June, the market felt even slower. And I think the good news that we captured in the data is for July, in most instances, the market did not appear to get worse. When we looked at the comments from the builders, there were things like, the market's not fast, but it's not terrible. Or sales are consistent with July expectations. Sales and traffic seem to be reverting back to what our normal summer slowdown should look like. So this goes back to what we had said earlier. In a lot of cases, the market does feel softer, but we also have to remind ourselves that often at this time of year, we're talking about the market feeling softer because of seasonality. But there's another important caveat, because I suspect the audience today will be some combination of public and private builders. We know that a lot of the public builders are having a better time than what we're finding for the private builders. It's not necessarily a new phenomenon, but we know that it's becoming more pronounced because of the incentives. This is showing us the average sales rate for publics versus privates. As of right now, public builders are selling 2 times that of the private builders. We have, I had mentioned earlier, our national outlook, the report that we put out every month. Last month, we put out a 15-page report on the differences between public and private builders. And this map was included in that report, which shows us where we do see where the outsized impact of public builders are. So the way you should look at this map is the darker the color, the higher the share of public builders. So we're looking at over 75%. In some parts of Florida, some parts of the Midwest, and then also parts in the Southwest. If we look at all of this though, and we talk about sales, we then want to connect the idea of new home sales with new home supply, because we know that this plays into housing affordability, like I said, the core problem we're dealing with. Now, what I want to show you here is the history of the relationship between starts and closings. So 2018, and I would say any quote unquote normal year, you would find that starts and closings are quote closely aligned. That's what we saw in the past. That relationship broke during the height of the pandemic, where we had stretched out timelines to get homes built. We had our supply chain issues, and you see that starts were outpacing closings. We knew in a lot of instances, builders felt good that if they could build a home, they could sell a home. That sentiment reversed once we saw interest rates go up in 2022. We saw such a dramatic pullback in starts where builders were saying, we're not confident that if we built a home today, we could sell a home today. So again, that relationship between starts and closings had completely broken. When you look at where we are today, and I think this is one of the most positive indicators in the new home market, is we've now seen that realignment between starts and closings. We're now finding these two things are working in lockstep together, but it highlights the importance of following those sales numbers because they do guide what happens with housing starts. Now, this is another, we happen to plan this webinar by accident when all of our new data is getting released. This data also got released this week. This is looking at second quarter housing starts for the top 25 housing markets across the country. This is the first time in a long time that all 25 of the markets have housing starts that are up on a year-over-year basis in the second quarter. That's where I have highlighted out with the orange. You can see that bar. Besides that, though, what I think is interesting is we now have 20 of the top 25 markets where housing starts are also above where they were in 2019. Not a big change if you look at 1 through 5, not a big change there, except San Antonio had been consistently below Austin, and in the most recent data, San Antonio is now number 5. Austin has been bumped down to number 6. When you look at growth in housing starts, we know that this ties back to community count. This is a really important data set that we monitor regularly, which is how many communities are available to consumers today. A community is anywhere where there are 5 or more units for sale. And as you track out community count nationally, we're down 25% compared to 2019. But remember the theme of the presentation, it's very hard to make a blanket statement about community count. Because in places like Phoenix and San Antonio and Minneapolis, we're either back to 2019 levels or within about 5%. So pretty close to, at least on a community count level, a more normal market. In places like Los Angeles, Atlanta, Tampa, we're talking community count that's down 50% compared to 2019. In places like LA and DC, we know that that developable land is going to be a really big hindrance to ever seeing a big lift in community count in those areas. So supply, we see that it is growing, but we see that we're still at a fairly low level when it comes to community count, which again has played into what we've seen with pricing. So then you say, okay, if we know that what is happening with supply and demand on the for sale side is leading to continued home price appreciation, especially on the resale side, we saw record levels in the data that was released this week. You then want to put yourself in the shoes of someone that is trying to weigh, should they rent or should they own today? Now, historically, if you look at the rent versus own equation, we have seen that renting has actually been more expensive than owning from 2010 all the way up until 2022. Now, that math changed when we saw higher home prices and higher interest rates. It was that double factor that pushed the monthly mortgage payment up higher. What this has done is resulted in more people staying put. When you look at equity residential, they're saying that they have the lowest number of people that have moved out to buy a home since they started tracking this data. When you listen to the REIT earnings calls, you hear lots of discussion of high levels of renewals, of people staying in place. But when you think about the rental market, one, we know that the quote unquote shelter component of inflation is still a bit higher than reality. We know that overall rents right now, we are basically flat to down on a national level. So we're finally seeing a little bit of a reprieve from a renter point of view or from a resident point of view that rents are not going up as much. But this is following 25% growth that we've seen since the beginning of the pandemic. But remember, saying that nationally rents are flat to down does not capture that there are lots of areas across the country where rents are still rising. What I want you to notice as you look at this chart is that there's a concentration of the areas where rents are rising today are in the Midwest, they're in the Northeast, and they're in Southern California. Now, the Northeast and Southern California have in common the fact that it's very difficult to build a lot more units, so they're just still in this supply-constrained environment. If you look at the Midwest, there is a better alignment of rental rates to incomes, which allows for a little bit more household formation, which I think continues to put some of those upward pressure on rents. On the flip side, there are also many markets where we see rents that have gone down on a year-over-year basis. Look at the markets that are listed here. A very high concentration across the Sun Belt, a lot of the areas where there was a lot of growth, there was a lot of construction, but then because of the slippage and how long it took for some of these units to get built, a lot of these units coming online at the same time. What that has done is led to, in certain parts of the country, vacancy rates going up, overall rents coming down. Again, when you think about the rental market, trying to make a national statement doesn't make sense because we had just seen there are such wild regional variations. But we are finding in some rental markets, the market does feel soft. The market does feel like a bit of a challenge. But in a very important data set, and I pulled this from Jay Parsons, he's at Madera Residential Research, love his research on the for rent side. What the key takeaway is the softer rental market in some of those areas is not because of demand. In fact, if you look at net absorptions, move-ins minus move-outs, the first half of this year was the second strongest first half in 2 decades. So there was demand. There were people that were renting out different communities, but in some cases, it's just that there's a little bit too much supply, even if the demand is high. A little bit later, we'll talk about our forecasts for what we think might happen to multifamily housing starts as we go through the rest of this year and into next year. But I want to switch gears a little bit and also talk about the remodeling market, because the remodeling market is following a similar path to certain rental markets where there is a decline right now. There's a decline in overall spending. You can track that in the black line in this chart. But I pulled this from our expert, Todd Tamilak. Todd works for Zonda. He's our building product expert. And when he looks at the trend that we've seen in remodeling spend so far, and he looks at history, he believes that today's environment is very similar to the environment we had seen in the early 80s. So early 80s is going to be the orange line in this chart. The way Todd calls this is we're in a point of deferral, but he believes that there is a very quick rebound on the other side. If you know Todd's research, Todd has called us, or this point in time, as this golden decade for remodeling. But if you've listened to either my or his presentation in the past, you know that we would say with a recession in between, with a receding, overall trends coming down. And that is what we're seeing in the black line for now. But remember, deferral, then rebound. And that idea of a rebound, why we're so positive on the industry trajectory, there's many reasons, but in today's presentation, I'm just going to focus on 3. So one of the key reasons is the aged housing stock. Nationally, we are tied for the oldest housing stock on record. As you look at this map, any of the markets that have a light blue dot are areas where the housing stock is over 50 years old. The median year built is over 50 years ago. If you look at some of the areas that have the more saturated blue, so you can see parts of the Southeast, for example, you can see that there is younger housing stock, but we say that there's 2 big differences. So older housing stock may need, so places like the Midwest, the Northeast, California, may need more money, may need more structural changes, maybe a bigger investment. But the areas that have younger housing stock, the age at which the median is right now falls into what Todd calls prime remodeling years. So homes that maybe need a new roof, or maybe they need a little bit of a cosmetic update to make the home appealing to today's homeowner or to today's home buyer. So we know reason one that we feel good is the aging housing stock. The second reason is this square footage mismatch. What Todd has researched is that the level of goods purchased per home, these are durable goods, goods that will last, has jumped at the same time that the available square footage in a home has declined. You can see the chart at the bottom, which tracks out the goods purchased in red, the square footage in the black. You can see how wide this has gotten. So you then can look at this as, yes, maybe people can get rid of some items, but this also highlights the idea of discontentment in your current home. So now you have an older housing stock with people discontented in their home met with a record level of equity accrued, $12 trillion just since 2020. That is the reason that Todd does feel good and does feel positive about this idea of the golden decade for remodeling. Again, he thinks that the market does still face some issues. I think the exact timeline's a little bit hard, maybe over the next 12, 24 months, but he sees nothing but really positive runway as we move forward and once we get past that kind of shaking out environment. Now, the final section here, I want to go through our forecast and final thoughts. I want to start by going back to single family housing starts. So remember, I had shown the housing starts data that did show through the second quarter, actual observed housing starts were up. And as we then turn to builders, we like them to give us a sense of what they think they'll do with housing starts because they know their land and lot backlog. They know how they're anticipating the market. We think this is a helpful way to think about housing starts and where they're going. We have still, again, this is data through July through Monday, 70% of builders that anticipate starting more homes this year versus last year. So don't read this as any kind of increase in pace. It's them looking at their full year of 24 over their full year of 23 and where do the numbers go. In general, we're hearing builders say that they do still think we'll finish this year up. Seeing as though we're halfway through the year, I'm sure a lot of you are also curious about 2025. So this is how the distribution looks for 2025. It's actually more enthusiasm than what we saw in 2024. In this case, now we're looking at about 80% of builders that think housing starts will be up. And this is predicated largely on two things. One is on land and lot availability. Not that we are flush with lots, but just that we are up from where we were during the height of the market in late 2020 and 2021. But also this is based on the forecast for mortgage rates. Now, if you know me, you know the last thing I like to forecast is mortgage rates. I think this is very easy to call wrong. I think there are a lot of moving parts, but we also know it is such a core part of the business that you almost can't ignore it. So here what I've decided to do is show you the forecasts of 6 top firms, including us at Zonda. So at least you can get a sense of where consensus is going. So through the end of this year, the forecast is that we will range between 6.5 and 6.9%. And as we go into the end of next year, the forecast is that rates will be between 6 and 6.5. So the important thing here is that the general consensus is that mortgage rates are more likely to be down than up. But notice that none of these forecasters are calling for rates to return to 3 or 4% anytime soon. That feels more like an anomaly. And again, the way that we were able to get those low rates was to go through a global pandemic and to go through a recession, things of which I don't think we're trying to repeat just to see interest rates come down. So we know from a builder point of view that is playing into their confidence about the market. Then you want to think about consumers. This is data we like to look at from the Federal Reserve that looks at residents that are under 50 years old that plan to move in less than 5 years. Right now, the most recent data tells us that about 60% plan to move in less than 5 years. That's up from 40% in 2021. So this ties into the idea of pent-up demand. Once people feel like they are happy with the inventory that's available, or they're happy with the value they can get in the home, or they're happy with the interest rate that is ultimately available. When you look at the multifamily market, so I'm going to use multifamily and rental interchangeably here, we know that this segment of housing and new construction is facing a lot weaker levels of activity. When we had come out with our forecast of 350 for multifamily, I think we shocked a lot of people. They thought we were way too low, and we may even move our forecast down a little bit more depending on how the rest of the year shakes out. So definitely seen a pullback from those record levels of multifamily construction units seen during the height of the pandemic. And as you think about 2025, I pulled this from Camden's earnings call, where they said that they think that starts will likely fall to just over 200,000 as we go into 2025. If you think about why there are such big differences here, remember in part what I had said, that there are certain areas where it feels like in a very short-term window, there's maybe a little bit too much supply, with that high level of supply causing those vacancy rates to increase, causing rents to go down. That plays into the number one reason why developers think starts will be down, which is the project is not economically feasible at this time. Second reason comes down to economic uncertainty. You can also see it's the availability of construction financing, and it's the permitting entitlement services that are holding back the market. What's important when you think about multifamily, I think most experts, economists, analysts believe that we're going to go through this really weird, choppy environment, that this year feels a little bit weird, next year feels a little bit weird, maybe a little bit oversupplied in some instances, but because there's not that much construction happening during this period, there's also a belief that the market starts to get undersupplied again, which then can lead to more building over time. So the rebound, at least from the estimates that we're hearing, is that it will likely start in 2026. I will say at Zonda, we have a multifamily expert that does advisory studies on the front end of these developments. Our expert, her name is Kimberly Byram. Her work has picked up recently. And why that's important to mention is she's working on projects that usually will get delivered in a few years. So her phones weren't ringing that much. And now they're starting to ring again, which is good to see some kind of rebound as we go into the later years. As I move into the final thoughts here, my final page, I didn't talk too much about consumers in today's presentation, so I just wanted to hit on a couple key thoughts from consumers here. The first goes back to the baby boomers. Now, for the baby boomer population, they're the second most active buyer today. They're the second largest living generation. They're the number one holder of wealth, the number one holder of assets. They're going through a big lifestyle change, which is retirement. They are the best buyer today from a positioning point of view. They're best positioned, but what we know is that baby boomers will often pull back as an election gets closer. So we think that, similar to Todd's thesis on remodeling, we think that there's a bit of a deferment happening with some of the baby boomers where they do rebound and go back to normal levels of activity once they feel more stable about the market. I don't have the same enthusiasm for some of the cost-sensitive buyers. I think there is a deferment going on, some people sitting on the sidelines, but it's harder to just come back for some of these consumers as they're trying to make sense of inflation, they're trying to make sense of mortgage rates, what's happened with their incomes, and just the fact that housing affordability has gotten so stretched. If you think about the entry-level market or just some of the lower income households, we need to continue to monitor that rental market. It's easy to think about what's happening in the rental market is happening in isolation, but we know that if someone is weighing, do I rent or buy? And if they're in an area where rents are going down and maybe they can get a month free on a new community, they may be less likely to convert to homeownership, at least in the near term. We're also monitoring the resale market. As you had seen earlier, there are definitely shifts year over year. Most areas still down from 2019, but you can see how quick that changed. We had met, I think it was April was the last time we met. We weren't seeing this kind of shift. It's only been in a matter of months. So we're just watching the resale market. Where are we seeing increases? What happens with those homes that are coming on the market? Are they selling quickly? Are they sitting on the market? Are they taking price cuts? And I think importantly, from a builder point of view, do we get to a point where maybe someone's struggling to sell their existing home because there is a bit more supply on the resale side? For the economy, certainly concerns. We're watching, and I had mentioned earlier, credit card defaults. We're watching auto defaults. There's a thing called the Sham rule, which is flagging just what is happening with the unemployment rate, just saying, hey, watch that for a shift in the market. Federal Reserve has said that they're concerned about a policy mistake of being too restrictive or not restrictive enough. They're still trying to make sense of it. Definitely concerns in the economy. But I would say, as I thought about the housing market and I thought about where we are and where we can go, when I started doing this presentation with BFS, I think it was 4 years ago now, maybe 3, we were talking about affordability and economic risks. We're sitting here in 2024, we're talking about affordability and economic risks. I think 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we're going to be talking about affordability and economic risks. I think those are long-standing things. If we think about the market, in particular from a builder point of view, we know that people will move for certain key reasons, almost regardless of what the Federal Reserve is doing. So I'd say from a marketing point of view or communicating to consumers, to me, the important thing is to go back to the whys. Consumers have told us point blank they will move because of a life change, they will move because of a job, and they will move because they want a nicer home. So with that, I will stop here, and Jack, I will bring you in for some questions.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Allie. As always, a lot of excellent content. So yeah, I'm going to give Allie here a moment to catch her breath and get something to drink, hopefully. Just a reminder to everyone, if you have any questions, now we're going to use this last sort of 10 minutes to answer some of them. Thanks to those of you who have submitted thus far. Feel free to keep them coming. Well, the first one that got asked a lot was, will we be getting a copy of this presentation? Yes, our goal, if not tomorrow, then by Monday at the latest, is to get a copy of the presentation as well as a recording of it out to anyone who has attended here. Second question that we've got is actually going to be for Mr. Tim Page. Tim, related to digital tools presentation, are you saying that Builders FirstSource is now able to prepare quotes for projects and send them to customers right in mybldr.com?
Yeah, Jack, that's a great question, and yes, that's exactly right. Our sales team has the ability to publish bids right in mybldr.com, and of course that allows home builders to easily find and review their current quotes, orders, and see their delivery photos, for example, right in the tool. And that's, from across BFS, the various projects, the various product categories, all in one place and whenever it's convenient for them. So yeah, great question. And again, our goal is to create tools like mybldr.com that make it easier for you to do business with BFS. So thank you.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Tim. All right, next question I think would be for Jeff Reddig. Can you comment about vinyl siding products? We recently had an email from PlyGym explaining their issues with certain colors due to supply chain issues.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. I won't speak specifically on PlyGym, but a lot of the manufacturers that are having capability or production issues have curtailed their SKUs down so that they can run more efficiently and produce more products. So what that means to the consumer out there, the builder in the field, is probably more limited choices. They're going to, the manufacturer is probably going to take the top 3 to 5 colors and produce those and limit back the colors that don't make up a lot of the production so that they can get more product out the door, less downtime. So I'm sure that's probably what PlyGym is doing at the moment.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Allie, I've been messaging you several of the questions as they've been coming in. I'll look to you to identify the ones that you feel are most relevant to the broader audience, or the ones that you feel like you can speak and give the most expansive answer about.
Awesome. Thanks, Jack. Yeah, so I see one of the questions says, does the resale market lack the ability to compete with new home construction due to the quality or cost of said homes? So yes, we know that Zonda just did a consumer research study that shows that consumers have increased their preference towards new homes. We know that new homes have the quality that they're looking for. When prices have gone up as much as they have, consumers like the idea that they can justify paying more by buying brand new, maybe having nicer finishes. We know that there's better tech-enabled homes. We know that there's the energy efficiency. I think very importantly in today's market, we also know about incentives and how important those are that make the new home market more competitive than the resale market. I would say though, just don't discount resale inventory, even if it does come online, and even if new does have an advantage, we know that the existing home market still makes up the lion's share of overall activity. And people, even if they prefer new, will sometimes choose an existing home because of maybe the location of the home. And I would say I'm one of the older millennials. A lot of my friends are either have bought homes or are still looking to buy a home. And what they'll say to me is they don't want to buy a new home because it's too cookie cutter. So sometimes someone will go into an existing home just for maybe a little bit more perceived character than from the new home. But yes, we see lots of reasons why the new home is more competitive than what we're seeing on the resale side. There's another question about, actually a few questions about home prices. What I want to say about home prices in particular in the new home space is that we have already seen in our data periods of time very recently where new home prices have gone down. The hard thing with new home prices is that the data is subject to mix shift. So sometimes we're finding that new home prices are going down because builders are just building smaller homes. Sometimes we're finding new home prices are going down because the location is shifting. Builders are moving into further away locations where base prices would be lower anyways. We also, though, do know from our survey that sometimes prices are down because builders are straight up cutting prices. We are going through right now an exercise in our home price appreciation forecasts. The responses, we do a collective, we have a model, and then we work with our team. The collective responses are due on Friday. So while a lot of the data sets were good timing, that was actually a bad timing for that question because we'll have our actual forecast done at the end of this week. There is a question about the public versus private report. So that report, just as a reminder, comes from our Zonda National Outlook report. So it is a client-only report that we look at just different topics. Okay, so there's a question about our definition of housing starts. We have a different, hold on, I'm just reading this. They are talking about a permit versus an actual start. It's a great question. The thing about our data with starts is ours are what we called observed starts. So our data, we collect it partly through satellite imagery. So we're able to capture not just when a home is permitted, but when we actually see construction. We also have boots on the ground, people going around to different communities to count those starts. So for our starts data, I don't know of anyone else that has more reliable data than us because of the ways that we collect it. It's not just based on numbers in a data set. It's from field research and from satellite imagery. I think, Jack, we're probably at time. Anything else from your end?
No, that is probably going to take us right to the hour. So we'll let everyone go kind of a minute earlier here. We'll do our best. Anyone who did submit a question, we didn't have time to respond to it, we'll do our best to answer on the back end here. But I just want to thank our speakers today. I want to thank our audience who has attended here and remind everyone that tentatively scheduled October 24th is going to be our third and final market intelligence webinar in partnership with Zonda and the lovely Allie Wolf, who just continues to crush it every time she speaks. Yeah, so keep that date tentatively on your calendars, October 24th. And I thank everyone and wish you a wonderful day. Take care.